Welcome to Minutes with Mary, special podcast mini-series on the Enneagram. I'm your host, Mary Stelatello, certified Enneagram coach, and I'm joined by co-host Jayson Morris, also certified Enneagram coach and facilitator. We decided to launch this mini-series in celebration of World Enneagram Day on May 25th. The Enneagram has its roots in Greek philosophy, and in the last century, it has gained more exposure as a transformational framework. It offers insights on human nature, supporting self-awareness, team development, and organizational culture. Our aspiration is to share the Enneagram with more leaders, teams, and organizations. Each episode will explore different dimensions of the Enneagram and its value for strengthening your communication skills, navigating conflict, giving and receiving feedback, developing your leadership, building strong teams, and so much more. Let's get started. In today's episode of the Enneagram mini-series, Jayson and I will explore how the Enneagram can support you in navigating conflict and difficult conversations. We will share a few tips to keep in mind when things get sticky and a bit uncomfortable. Let's get started. Jayson, welcome back. Let's do a quick check-in to settle in today. How are you coming into today's conversation?
I'm good. A little tired, a little bit amped. I just wrapped up an intense stretch where I did 40 Enneagram debriefs and 8 workshops with these amazing educational nonprofits in East Africa. So a lot of early mornings, but some really incredible conversations and some shifts that are starting to happen in these leaders. So excited to just build on that with you. How are you doing this morning, Mary?
Wow. Okay, let me just say wow first. As someone who resonates with the type 3, as you do on the Enneagram, I can see the stamina you possess to go the distance and achieve these results. Amazing. For me, I am coming into today's conversation a little frazzled. This is my last conversation, which I'm excited about, before packing up my office in Mexico and returning to Wisconsin. So I need to take a breath, slow down, so I'm fully present. So thanks for us having this little check-in.
Yeah, I think we all need to take a little breath.
The world, right? We all need to breathe more. Okay. So for today's episode, listeners, we're going to explore a different dimension of the Enneagram. In our last episode, we discussed the Enneagram and communication styles. And today we're going to go a step further and discuss when communication goes askew, perhaps resulting in conflict. Conflict's not all bad. It can help us get to better solutions and outcomes. Some Enneagram styles are more comfortable navigating conflict than others. And why is that? And how can we mitigate the negative impacts and repair any harm when it does arise? So, Jayson, always a juicy topic, particularly in the workplace when there are a lot of different dimensions at play: power dynamics, culture, race, gender. Where do you start when you explore this topic of navigating conflict?
So I actually start where you just did. I talk about the word conflict, and I'll say it a few times and ask people, well, what comes up for you when I say that word? What comes up in your body? What memories? What emotions? And it's interesting because so many people will say they don't like it, they avoid it. Just hearing that word makes their stomachs churn. And then type 8s will come in and they'll often share that they don't mind conflict at all, that it's simply a step to get to greater understanding and clarity, which shocks people. And it really opens up and invites this conversation and some curiosity about what is this? What is this conflict? What's going on here? I'm curious if that tracks for you as a type 8.
Listeners, I was smiling when Jayson said that. I guess that when I introduced conflict, earlier in the intro, I should have included the caveat from my perspective. It might have helped people. It absolutely tracks with my perspective. And as I mentioned in the intro, conflict is a normal part of communication. So, as someone who does align with the type 8 style, it isn't something I shy away from. I recently attended a workshop series hosted by the Leadership Learning Community on liberatory leadership. And one of their sessions was on generative conflict. I really loved the way they framed it and why conflict matters. Conflict's part of authentic relationships. And by learning how to go through conflict, we can turn conflict into opportunities for learning, deeper relationships, stronger values alignment, and transformation. So conflict can be a portal to something new. So as a type 8, I might say, bring it on.
That's so funny. I think that shocks so many people that there's actually people out there who say, bring it on, who don't mind it, who might even embrace it and welcome it or even seek it out. And so when I introduce it and there's that shock, then we'll try and unpack it. And like you said, understanding the nature of conflict is so important. So conflict only arises when people care about the outcome. If you don't really care, there's not really conflict. And it sits on that spectrum that you're talking about. I love that term, generative conflict. On one side of the spectrum, there's hidden conflict, which happens when people try to avoid or deny the tension. And we see certain types living in that space. And what that does is it just festers underneath the surface and often leaks out and expresses in indirect or unhealthy ways. And then on the far end of the spectrum, on the other side, is destructive conflict. And that involves personal attacks on people instead of the issues, big emotions, or situations blowing up in your face. And I think that's what many people project out in their heads, which reinforces the conflict avoidance. But in that middle is that healthy conflict, that generative conflict that you're talking about, which is constructive and grounded and respectful. And it acknowledges first where there's commonality, but then focuses where are the points of disagreement. And it separates the individual from the issue at hand. And with that goal that you're talking about, the new understanding and the new resolution that can only come about if we really engage in that tension to begin with. And then after I talk about a bit of that, I'll share some best practices around conflict. How do we actually move into it with more comfort? Which is something that you and I will get into during our workshop around stress and conflict. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious to hear what you would add.
Thank you for framing that continuum of conflict. And thinking about conflict, it brings me to some of my other coach training, referred to as conversational intelligence or CIQ. And it looks at the neuroscience of conversation. When we're fearful and stressed, we are operating from our primitive brain, the most developed part of our brain that saved us from lions in our early stages as humans. The cortisol pumps and we can't access that part of our brain that allows us to navigate conflict, which is the prefrontal cortex part of our brain. And in the prefrontal cortex resides the abilities for empathy, creativity, and innovation, which are all essential for navigating conflict and arriving at a shared understanding and resolution. So how does this relate to the Enneagram? Okay, I'm hanging in there, folks. Early Enneagram theorists argued for the existence of 3 centers of intelligence: head, heart, and gut. Now, neuroscience has proven that we have additional centers in our brain that influence how our personality develops and how the brain responds to change and pressure. So by understanding the brain, we can interpret behavior more accurately and therefore build better strategies to help shift how we behave. So this deeper understanding allows us as individuals and as coaches to better support clients on their journey for change. So for example, each Enneagram type's worldview and defense mechanisms are neurological patterns that were formed through their developmental experiences in childhood to create a comfort zone, safety. And those patterns direct our focus of attention to specific aspects of our world and our life. So this wiring underpins our personality, forming a set of deep beliefs and motivations and filters that are intended to keep us safe. So the more we know about the brain is that it's capable of incredible adaptation and change called neuroplasticity. This ability to rewire, adapt, and respond differently within a given situation. So this ability to transform allows our brain to grow new neural pathways, which can break through those old patterns and defenses to unlock our personal development. So, this for me is what's super exciting about how the Enneagram can transform our way of relating to each other and approaching conflicts that keep us stuck in these lifelong patterns. Okay, that was a lot. So, let's shift the focus here. And as we discussed in our previous episodes, the Enneagram starts with individual and our own self awareness. It all supports the understanding of those interpersonal dynamics, which can be with other people or within teams. And it ultimately can move to the level of systems within organizations and beyond. So, pretty much anywhere people interact. So, let's unpack these levels, starting with the individual. So, Jayson, how have you seen the Enneagram help you understand your own relationship to conflict, how it differs from others that lead from a different Enneagram type?
Yeah. So similar to the last episode where we talked about communication, I think we can start with the individual types and explore what creates stress and tension, what sort of triggers people have that can lead to conflict. And for me as a type 3, I get particularly on edge if failure or looking bad starts to creep up into the picture, starts to creep into my mind. So it could be others not following through on what they said they would do, or feeling set up for failure or disappointment, or just feeling like I'm not going to succeed. And that's what starts to build the stress and tension that leads to conflict. And I definitely also resonate with the type 3 defensiveness. Us type 3s can take critical feedback very personally, probably too personally, because we tie our self worth to our achievements. And so this has been a huge development area for me to constantly remind myself that I'm so much more than what I do. And it is, to your point on the neuroscience, it's constantly reinforcing these new neural pathways, which is that I am more than what I do. And feedback and criticism and conflict that are related to something is not the same thing as it being directed to me as a person. And so, with that awareness, I've brought in new practices when I'm in conflict situations to create more space and separation between me and the issue. And that helps. And that starts to build those new neural pathways that allow my system to feel more safe in tension, in conflict. And then I've learned about other Enneagram styles and how they're different. And I've come to understand what most often activates the fight, flight, freeze responses for each of the types, as well as how they show their stress and tension. And then what's perhaps most important is having a sense of what I can do to help navigate the conflict, to put people more at ease and work more towards a resolution. And there's actually little things that we can do for each type to help ease that and to move towards a commonality.
Mm, nice.
So what about you? What have you learned about your conflict style or how others experience your style?
Hmm. Well, before I respond to that, I just want to touch on what you said about little tips and ways that you can put others at ease. And it's so helpful to recognize that there are ways that we can shift to put others at ease, which then sets a completely different starting point for any kind of conversation or how to navigate that conflict. So thank you for sharing that. I will say, as someone who leads from the Enneagram 8 style, listeners, you may recall from our last episode, my communication style is direct and can be assertive. Well, when conflict is brewing, that style cranks up a few notches, and my conflict strategy is often reactive and does not move us to a mutually acceptable solution without thought and me helping to redirect it. That's the autopilot navigation approach. As an Enneagram 8, anger is an emotion that's easily accessible. And so when I'm in conflict, the internal message is that you are trying to take advantage of me and I want the outcome to be fair. Of course, that's what fair is in my perspective and my worldview. However, when I am able to slow down that reactive tendency, it allows for me to be more open and present to that other person. It helps me if people are straightforward, direct, and honest in their communication with me. So my radar isn't going up thinking, are you trying to take advantage of me or not? So where I can feel that authenticity of I'm being straight with you. And that can be hard for others who have a different worldview because direct communication may feel like they're going to hurt me if they're direct and honest. So it's really this dance between the speaker and the listener and helping to put both of them and us at ease, as you mentioned, Jayson. My training as a coach has also really helped me when I am personally navigating conflict. All those years of learning how to ask open-ended questions as coaches are superpower. When I can approach conflict from a place of asking, what's the opportunity here? What can I learn about how to communicate more effectively so the other person can actually receive what I'm saying? I can become less reactive and more collaborative. Those are a couple of the things that come to mind for me. So let's shift into the leaders in the workplace and what you've seen and how you've supported leaders to navigate conflict with colleagues and their teams.
Before I do, I just want to touch on something you just said. One of the most powerful things that I use and some of my clients now use is this idea of bringing curiosity, and simply the phrase, I'm curious. I'm curious about, or I'm curious what's happening for you. So powerful in taking the energy of a conflict situation down. So in terms of how I work with leaders, I would say similar to my discovery, I think it's really powerful when leaders discover their own unique relationship to conflict in terms of what they're comfortable with or where there's discomfort and how they appear when they're triggered or in conflict so that they bring that self-awareness to the situations. And then what are some of the ways that they or others can help them navigate the situation? We can self-regulate. We can also ask people for their support in helping us self-regulate. It's kind of funny. Sometimes I will give somebody the words that I need to hear, but when I hear them, my system downregulates. So yeah, I totally resonate with what you said about your type 8 tendencies. I've learned over time working with a few type 8s about that need for directness and that frustration that arises if people are being too nice or passive. And so now when I coach type 8s, I have to amp myself up a bit to be more direct, to push back, to sometimes bring up the argument and conflict. Whereas with other types, I bring a softer approach. And so I guess in general, when I work with all types, we talk about how they can slow down, how to get out of swirling thoughts, and in some cases, swirling hearts and emotions, and center themselves. And there's specific practices that we can do to slow things down. And then we can talk through what's happening for them in conflict. What's the stories in their heads on what will support them to move through the situation. And it's very different for each type. So we've talked about 8s and that being able to dive in and engage in the issue at hand directly. But type 9s might need some assurance that the conflict can be navigated in healthy ways and that we're going to get back to peace and harmony because that's what they're so oriented to. And, type 9s don't share their opinions as much. So some affirmation that you really want to hear their perspective and then validating that. Type 5's completely different. They might need advance notice to prepare for the conversation because they don't want to be caught off guard. And they need time and space to process. And they actually sometimes need a warning of how much time is this going to take? We're going to spend 10 minutes talking about this and we're going to take a break because type 5s are so oriented to energy management and resource management. Type 7 is totally different. They might need to be encouraged to share the less pleasant feelings and thoughts because they are so oriented to positive thinking and unconsciously silver lining or avoiding an issue. And so they then in conflict need some positive can do tone and also some gentle, like it's going to be okay if we spend some time talking about conflict. We're going to get back to the fun and the positive. And there's so many more we could, and then this is why we're going to do that workshop later on, is because there's so many different ways that each of the types gets into conflict and how we can support them in navigating it. What about you? What have you experienced?
Well, first, I just want to say I love the way that you kind of paint the canvas of each of the different styles approach to conflict. And hopefully, listeners, maybe some of that resonates with you, just as when Jayson was talking earlier about the type 8 style, and I was sharing with him how that resonated with how I see the world. So, more to come. Thank you for offering that. And yes, we will be talking about this in a deeper dive workshop in the future. So, what have I experienced? What I have found, and you mentioned this earlier too, is the Enneagram framework can be a little overwhelming for folks at first pass because it's so complex, which of course makes a lot of sense. So, after exploring someone's individual communication styles so they really can embrace or feel that their patterns, their defense mechanisms, their activators, we then look at the balance of their three intelligences, their three centers, back to the brain again. And we process information leading from one of those centers. Most often it's from the same center as our dominant type. Not always, but most often. So for example, as someone who leads from the Enneagram style 8 center, that style resides in the action center. My natural processing framework is action. Let's get going. At the expense of thinking and feeling. Knowing that about myself, I recognize that it's incredibly helpful to an overall outcome to pause and ask myself, what haven't I thought about yet? What thoughts do other people have? How can that be helpful before action? And how does that impact others? As another framework, how might they feel about this? So looking at it leading from the feeling center, how do I want others to feel leaving the conversation? I've worked with a leader who leads from the Enneagram type 2 style, which is located in the feeling center of intelligence. And it was hard for her to manage her emotions when she was in tense situations. She might cry in a professional setting, and she really didn't want to do that because of the impact it would have on others. So we explored what it would look like if she responded from her thinking center perspective. We also came up with some pattern disruptors like breathing, asking for space to think, to calm her autonomic nervous system, which was getting activated by that cortisol, putting her in her primitive brain and resulting in her inability to have difficult conversations. So just shifting, like what center could I tap into to help myself in engaging with others was something that was helpful. Well, Jayson, we are coming to the end of our episode. Once again, if there's one or two things that you want our listeners to leave with regarding the Enneagram and navigating conflict, what would those be?
Well, first, we talked about the personal part of conflict, and we also talked about the interpersonal, how one or two or more people relate. We didn't talk about team relationship to conflict. And that's another thing just to consider, that different teams have different styles of conflict. A law office is going to have a very different style than a creative arts organization. And so that's something to think about. Again, neither's right or wrong. They're just different. And we want to round it out and bring more awareness to it. But I guess I would say conflict is a sign that something important is happening and that there's a disconnect between two or more people. And one of the most important things is to spend time reflecting on what's happening for you and to open the possibility of what might be happening for the other person. I think that orienting to curiosity, as I said earlier, is one of the most important keys. And the Enneagram can help remind us that there are other people out there that see the world through very different lenses and have very different motivations and core fears, and they express differently. So lastly, I would say, can I work to slow myself down? Can I work to slow the conversation down a bit and really share what's going on from a centered place and ask them what they're experiencing and really listen from a place of trying to understand and be curious.
Okay, fantastic nuggets. I think the theme for today's episode is slow down and also reflect and get curious. So, with some curiosity, folks, before we close out this session, I want to share this is our final announcement of a special opportunity. As we mentioned at the beginning of the episode, May 25th is World Enneagram Day. And to celebrate that, we want to bring the Enneagram to more people in the world. Jayson and I are offering a special World Enneagram Day personal discovery promotion. It's a lot to say. We are offering access to the IEQ9 Integrative Enneagram Assessment, plus a live 45-minute individual debrief and coaching conversation with either Jayson or myself. We're both Enneagram coaches. And wait, there's more. A follow-up 75-minute introduction to the Enneagram virtual workshop, all for just $250. That's a 50% discount. And we're offering this promotion until May 31st. And the program will return to its regular price of $500. You will find the link in the show notes. And again, it will only be valid through May 31st. If you're not ready to jump in, we're offering a free live webinar on May 22nd, which is tomorrow, to explore all 9 types of the Enneagram and other components. So we hope you will join us for one of these opportunities.